Well, hello and welcome to Genesis chapter 22. This passage is so important to our understanding of the Old Testament, what it means to be the people of God, how it foreshadows the coming of the Lord Jesus, that we're going to slow down our reading of Genesis 22. And as we slow it down, we're going to pause at 6 points in our text. And as we pause, we're going to reflect at each one of those 6 points on its importance within the structure of Genesis itself, its importance within the scope of the Old Testament, its importance as being a fulfilled story in Jesus Christ, and then its relevance for us. So each time we pause, we're going to take in those 4 points in order that we get a grasp of this amazing and important passage in the Old Testament. Genesis 22 deals with Abraham's testing by God in the sacrifice of his son. And what I'm going to do now is pause to enable you to read the entire passage, and it will come up on the screen as it's being read. And as you do read it, I want you to take in what are the critical elements of this passage that we need to have a grasp on, just to give you some heads up. The passage deals with the ideas of God's testing, God's discipline, in other words. It deals with the idea that God himself can set apart things which he himself seemingly would not be okay with, the contradiction or the conundrum that is within the passage. And that deals with other concepts like sacrifice that you'll see. The idea that is clearly represented here is why would God want or even instruct Abraham to have his son Isaac sacrificed. So we'll look at the idea of sacrifice when we come up to it. And it ends with a topic that we ourselves have looked at a number of times, and that is the covenant, which this passage goes on to in verses 15 to 19. But pause now, or as it comes up, you can follow along with the reading on the screen. Genesis chapter 22, beginning at verse 1 through to the end of verse 19. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we'll come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father." "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and the wood are here," Isaac said, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the 2 of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me." Then Abraham returned to his servants, and they set off together to Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. As you either paused and read or listen to the reading on the screen, I'm sure a number of ideas came into your mind, but I think the main one for our modern sensitivities is probably the contradiction or conundrum of how can God instruct a person to do something which he is fundamentally against having done, that is the sacrifice of Isaac instead of letting him live, even though, of course, that's what it ends up being exactly. So we're going to reflect in the next couple of days on the nature of a few of the points that we've raised earlier in terms of discipleship, in terms of the beauty around sacrifice and its relationship to the Lord Jesus. And tomorrow, just to foreshadow, we're going to look at verse 1 and verse 2, but ostensibly verse 1, and the idea that God tested Abraham. And there's a few passages that, if you have time, will be excellent to read. Hebrews 11 verses 8 through to 19. That passage itself is a passage that deals with Abraham and the concept of testing. Now, testing, when it comes to God and us, is not something to prove our failure necessarily, but a test in order to demonstrate our faithfulness. God doesn't need to test us in order to demonstrate to himself that our faith is genuine, but it demonstrates it to us. It proves the genuineness of our faith. And so that's going to be our first topic tomorrow. Why does God test? What can we gain from these tests that God gives us? And what are some other biblical parallels that we can look at? And we'll chiefly look, of course, through when Jesus was tested and what we can draw from both the testing of Jesus, the testing here in Genesis 22, and also its relationship to us.